Happy birthday, Willie Mays. That's the only positive thing I can say about the Giants right now.
Yeah.
Happy birthday to the greatest to ever do it.
Absolute legend. An American treasure.
He really is. He really is. Okay, we'll get back to your call shortly. 888-957-957. It's Willard and Dibs. One of our favorite guys to talk baseball with. Been doing it forever. Does a great job with it. One of the top voices on ESPN. You know him. It's Tim Kurkjian. Hey, Tim. Tim, thanks for coming on. What's in your eyes, what's the biggest problem with this team?
Well, they're not hitting. That's fairly obvious. Blake Snell is on the injured list. Logan Webb is really good, but he's had a couple of bad starts. I mean, when you're struggling, your best pitcher, or at least your best healthy pitcher, has to be good as often as possible. But again, it's the guys that they picked up in the offseason who we thought would make a big difference offensively. That just hasn't happened yet. But it's early, and I'm not going to worry tremendously about the Giants just yet. I think they have to get much better than this offensively. They have to get Snell back. A few other things have to happen, and it just hasn't happened yet. We're 35 games in. Things change, but this has not been an encouraging start.
And 6 games with Colorado coming up, which hopefully can be a salve for their collective wounds. But I guess at what point, Tim, do you look at it and say it's no longer early? Because we look at this 4-game sweep and a 1-6 trip so far. It's been dreadful. At what point can you start to really make strong judgments about this Giants team?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just think it's a little bit early. I still go back to the Nationals of 2019, who were 19-31. They played 50 games, and they were terrible, and they won the World Series. And I'm not suggesting the Giants are going to turn it around and win the World Series. I'm just saying you have to be careful about going a little bit too early on a team and saying, all right, it's not going to happen this year, time to unload, or you better go make a giant trade. They spent a lot of money in the offseason to get better. So you just have to be patient, which is really hard to do, and you just have to hope that eventually or quickly this turns around. And you can't all – the Phillies have won 17 out of 20 games. I mean, Alec Boehm has been on fire. Bryce Harper is finally starting to get hot. You ran into the Phillies at the absolute wrong time because they are playing as well as any team in baseball. So timing hasn't been good, and you're right. You're going to go play the Rockies for 6 games. You better get 5 out of 6 if you're going to start to turn things in the right direction.
Well, Tim, your sort of words of patience noted. However, what if I asked you about this? Much bigger picture, broader than this year. Why has this organization been seemingly totally unable in the last decade to produce homegrown offensive talent?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm not sure I have a great answer to it. But the one thing I do know in today's baseball, the best way to win is to draft and develop your own guys. Get them signed long-term, a la the Braves and several other teams. Otherwise, you're going to be in the market every offseason to try to get somebody to come in and fill a spot that you couldn't fill through your farm system. So you just have to take another hard look and say, why isn't this happening? It's also cyclical, that things turn, and suddenly here comes a player you didn't expect to be really good. But you're right. They need more production from their homegrown guys because it often, well, sometimes it doesn't work when you just go get free agents and say, come on, let's join this team, big ballpark, tough place to hit certain days. We need you to produce right away. It doesn't always work that way either.
Does that make it more difficult for them to lure free agents, the fact that it is such a big ballpark and it is so tough to hit there?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, so many of our players are so conscious now of their numbers, and there is so much money to go around that they look and say, you know, some of them must look at this and say, where's the best place for me to hit home runs? Cincinnati or San Francisco? And it's a no-brainer, and that can go for a bunch of other ballparks. So it's a beautiful park. It's a great place to play. But if you're a hitter and you want to hit 30 home runs, which, as you guys know, no Giant has done since Barry Bonds, that's not the place to go. But that's no excuse. You still have to swing the bats when you get there, and it just hasn't happened this year.
Tim Kurkjian, ESPN, one of the top baseball voices in the whole world, talking to us right now on Willard and Dibs after the Giants drop yet another one, suffer a 4-game sweep at the hands of the Phillies. They have, count it, one time scored 4 runs in the last 11 games, and it came last night when someone named Jackson hit a solo home run in his 3rd major league at bat in the history of his life. So that's the situation that we're sort of pulling apart here. And Tim, I have so many questions about how they end up here. This won't surprise you because when things go bad, the boss is the boss. Farhan Zaidi does not have a ton of fans in the fan base right now. How would you characterize his seat currently?
Well, if you're asking me, is it really hot? I would say no. Farhan has been an excellent executive for a long time, but this is a frustrated fan base, and I understand why. And you can't look in this division without being exceptionally worried that the Padres just picked up a 333 hitter over the last 3 seasons. The Dodgers are really, really good, and they're only going to get better. Walker Buehler comes back tonight. So when you look at the job the front office has done with the Giants, obviously the job has not been done since the 107-win season, and this is where Farhan and his group has got to figure this out. And but I don't think he's on a hot seat at this point, but we'll see about that.
Yeah, I think it gets hotter if the losing does continue. Does it make sense to you, Tim, based on what you were saying about the Dodgers and Padres and their lineups, that Farhan has gone the route of really loading up on the pitching? And can that be good enough when Snell comes back and Robbie Ray eventually gets healthy? Can their pitching be good enough to carry them far in this West?
Yes, I think their pitching has a chance to be really good. Now, Robbie Ray has to return to something close to the Cy Young winner of a few years ago. Blake Snell has to return really close to the Cy Young winner last season because, again, I look at their lineup and I see it getting much better than this, but I still don't see it being a really good offensive team at any point, which means you're going to have to pitch their way through. I'm still not sold that the rest of the National League is filled with really good wild card contenders. I'm not sure I see them, other than the Phillies and the Braves, are making the playoffs. The Central, I see only one team probably coming out of there. And with the Diamondbacks struggling and the Padres, who I like, and I picked them to win a wild card at the beginning of the year, they're no guarantee to be great. So there's going to be a spot open for the Giants. But I think the best way for them to make the playoffs, and right now it's a bit of a reach, they're going to have to outpitch everyone. But they have a chance to do that if all those guys come back healthy.
Tim, I want to ask you a question about Matt Chapman. He's only had 1 year in his career where he hit above 250, and we didn't know what COVID meant when that happened. So it's been a minute. And so he's never been this great average hitter. But coming off of Toronto last year, huge start. Then he had the hand injury and never really got back to form. Giants fans were hoping that the healthy Chapman was going to look a lot different than this. Now that he's in his 30s, is this just him? What are your thoughts on his future?
Well, this might be him. Now, he's better than a 230 hitter. I think he's better than a 250 hitter. But last year with the Blue Jays, I know I checked with some people, and they said, look, if you throw the ball to this position, this spot with Matt Chapman, he can hit it out of the ballpark with anybody. But once you recognize that this is the ball that he crushes, and you can avoid that, you can get him out. It's what people in the business call a collision hitter, that he swings a certain way like most of the time, and if you throw it in that bat path, he's going to do some serious damage. But if you avoid that bat path, not only can you get him out, you can strike him out. I'm not sold that Matt Chapman is done as an above-average offensive player. But the last couple of years have been, concerning. I would think that his average has dropped because Bob Melvin told me years ago, this guy's going to win an MVP someday. And right now, he just doesn't look like an MVP caliber player.
Yeah, 209 is the current batting average and 41 strikeouts on the year. Are you surprised with the slow start that Jorge Soler has had? I know he's out with a little bit of a shoulder issue now, but doesn't seem like he's had the power bat that was coming as advertised.
Yeah, I mean, he had a great year for the Marlins last year, and he's had some big years before that. So, yes, I think the shoulder is bothering him, and I think he'll be back. I think he'll hit a bunch of homers. He might even hit 30 before he's done, but, he was their big acquisition to put in the middle of the order. And, again, the difference is, Juan Soto was the big acquisition that the Yankees put in the middle of their order, and Soler is certainly not Juan Soto, but I fully expect him to hit with way more power than he has to this point. It's just really hard to gauge a team after 35 games.
Tim Kurkjian, ESPN, is with us here on Willard and Dibs. It is Willie Mays' birthday. Beyond the obvious, I know you've even called him the best to ever do it. So do we. But what comes to mind first when you think of Willie Mays?
Well, when he came up in 1951, baseball had never seen a player like him. That kind of combination of power, speed, and defense. And I believe that 73 years after his major league debut, he is still the greatest combination of power, speed, and defense that the game has ever seen. He's the only player ever with a 300 career average, 300 homers, and 10 gold gloves. He did things on the field that no one really has ever done quite like him. He's arguably the greatest defensive center fielder of all time. He was a great base runner. He stole 339 bases. There wasn't anything that he couldn't do. I remember talking to Johnny Bench. I wrote an enormously long story when he turned 90 3 years ago. And Johnny Bench basically said he's magical. He is the best player I've ever seen. He is the perfect baseball player. And I'm not sure there's a better description for him than that, because there was nothing that Willie Mays couldn't do on the baseball field. And I repeat, he's the best player I've ever seen.
Is there anybody playing today that can even assimilate to the multitude of skills that Willie Mays had? Somebody who is that good defensively and has the kind of speed and power that Willie possessed?
Well, last year, Ronald Acuna Jr. hit 40 homers and stole 70 bases when no one had ever hit 30 homers and stolen 60 bases. Plus, he's got a really good throwing arm in right field, and he is a very good defensive right fielder. So he's probably the best comp for Willie Mays. And I love Ronald Acuna. He won the MVP last year, and Chipper Jones told me he's the most talented player I've ever seen wear a major league uniform. But let's be clear about this. As great a player as Acuna is, he wasn't the same base runner, even though he steals a lot of bases, that Willie Mays was. And as good an outfielder as he was, he's not Willie Mays in the outfield. And he's great in the outfield, but Willie Mays was better than everyone else.
Tim, have you had a chance to talk to Willie a lot in your career?
Yes, I have. Now, it's been several years because, as you know, he doesn't do very many interviews, but I've talked to him many times over the years, and it is always, and I shouldn't acknowledge this, a thrill of a lifetime, is that I am talking to Willie Mays right now. And at Cooperstown, maybe 10 years ago, I interviewed Willie Mays and Hank Aaron at the same time. That was quite a thrill for a tiny little guy from Maryland.
Are you going to be out at Rickwood Field for this event next month?
I certainly hope so. I haven't been told yet, but that's the kind of thing that's right up my alley. I have put my name in, but I'm not in charge of that stuff.
Well, I mean, you could always pay your own way, Tim. You could do that.
Right. Well, believe me, lately I have done that, and I'll do. I mean, this is a historic game, and when anything is involved with Willie Mays, you can count me in.
Love it. Love it. Tim, thank you so much for coming on. Great stuff.
Okay. Thanks, fellas. See you.
Tim Kurkjian, ESPN.